Alright, so there's one last topic around generics that I want to cover before we try to refactor the CSV writer class we made into a generic one, and that topic is generic constraints. Now, a generic constraint is basically a way to limit the types of data that can be passed into a generic function, interface, type alias, or class. I think the best way to demonstrate why and how we do this is by doing a very quick example. So what I'm going to do is just paste in another function. And it's very simple. We're taking an ID argument, which is a number, and we don't return anything, so we say the return type is void. Then we say this.data is equal to this.data.filter. So we fire a function for each item in this data array, and we refer to each one as item. And then we check the item ID inside this array against the ID that we take in as an argument right here when we call this method. Now, if the IDs match, then we're going to filter that one out of the array, so we're essentially deleting it, right? So then, there is a problem, and the problem is over here. It says property ID does not exist on type T. So, we're trying to access an ID property on each item inside this data array, but TypeScript doesn't know that anything inside here has an ID property, and it doesn't. But even if it did, if we had an ID right here that was 3, it still wouldn't know that the type we pass in here has an ID property. We don't specify that anywhere. So how do we get around this? So the way we can do this is by using a generic constraint, which constrains or restricts the type of data that can work with it. So first up, I'm going to make an interface called hasID. And this interface is going to specify that whatever implements the interface must have an ID property, and that is going to be a number. And then when we say T right here after the class name, we can add in the constraint by saying that T extends hasID, which means that now, whatever type of data T is, it must essentially now have this ID property on it, alright? Otherwise, we won't be allowed to use that data type to make an instance of this class. So this is how we make a generic constraint like this right here. We're forcing the data type to implement some condition or other, alright? So now we've added that, we need to make sure the data objects we pass in to the class down here have the ID property. So we already have an ID for this. Well, let's add IDs for the others, ID1, and then ID2 right here. And still, we get an error, and that's because this interface right here doesn't actually say we have an ID property. So we need to add the ID property over here, which is a number. So now this satisfies the hasID interface right here because we explicitly say we expect an ID property. Now, if we delete one of these ID properties, we're going to get an error right here to say we need it. Alright, so we have those IDs. We specify the ID right here, so everything should now work except this down here because we're not passing an ID into this add method either. We need one, let's say ID4 for that. But now everything should work. And we're not getting an error right here anymore because it knows that this item has an ID because item T extends hasID. And when it extends the interface, TypeScript can know for definite that whatever T is has this ID property. If it didn't have that, we wouldn't be allowed to pass it in, right? Because remember, if it doesn't have this, we get an error right here. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to save this and make sure these still work down here, but also try deleting one. So let's call delete one as well. We'll say uses.delete one. We're going to pass in an ID, which needs to be a number. So I'm going to delete the Mario one. In fact, I'll delete Sean myself. Alright. So pass in number 3, and I'm going to open up the terminal, and we can see that now that one has been deleted. Cool.